Russia has been really thinking about invading Ukraine on and off for at least the last decade. The fact of the matter is that Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union, which broke up in the early 1990s. And since that time, many Russians, including Russian leaders, have viewed Ukraine as part of the Russian space, right or wrong. With opportunities that were present in the geopolitical landscape, Russia felt emboldened to violate international law and invade Ukraine. The discussion around the history of Ukraine and its connection to Russia dates back more than a century, dates back to the creation of the Soviet Union by the Bolsheviks in the early 20th century. And through the 1950s and 60s under Nikita Khrushchev, there's a sense today in Russia that the Russian part of the Soviet Union allowed Ukraine to start establishing its own independence. And then the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, Ukraine further moved away from the Russian fold. That is part of the narrative being told in Russia, being told by Vladimir Putin. It's a much more complicated story than that, but this is in part a story about Russian imperialism that dates back centuries. The behavior of the Russian government, and specifically of President Vladimir Putin over the last 2 weeks, has made it clear that he had intentions far beyond the eastern part of Ukraine and the two breakaway republics. And we've seen that with the taking over of Kharkiv, the second largest city, and now the siege of Kiev. The reality is, I think the long game here for Russia is one that is beyond just protecting a certain enclave or a certain part of Ukraine and Russian-speaking citizens of that part of Ukraine. I think we're seeing a much broader scale invasion. I think there are real risks as to other democratic nations adjacent to Russia, and I think the risk is real. A lot of people are wondering why now. There are a lot of reasons, but one that very few are discussing is the end of the Olympic Games. If you notice when Russia attacked, it was the day after the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics. In 2014, Russia invaded Crimea shortly after the end of the Sochi Olympics. The reality is there are very few mechanisms that actually can serve as a disincentive for Russian aggression, and one of them is around sport. What scares Russia is having its team denied a place in the World Cup. That's going to play out in the coming days. But they did not want to be excluded from the Olympic Games. One of Russia's most important allies is China, which was hosting the most recent Winter Olympics. And so it's quite clear to me that Vladimir Putin, who was there for the opening ceremonies, did not want to do anything to distract from the Games of his important and vital partner. But it is no coincidence that the day after the end of the Olympic Games was the day when Russia began moving forward in this plan. The United States has a number of interests in terms of supporting Ukraine. First and foremost, the violation of the sovereignty of a state is something that, as a world leader, we have a responsibility to protect. Ukraine did nothing to threaten Russia, and so we had a responsibility to step in to protect the Ukrainian people, even though we haven't done so militarily, but to do so through economic and other measures. At the same time, Ukraine is an important ally of the United States, and Ukraine has shifted to a democracy in the post-Soviet world, so it's an important partner and foothold in a region that has not always known democracy. The rule of law is a foundational concept which protects citizens from their state, which protects all of us from outside interference, and the attack on Ukraine is an attack on the very foundations of the rule of law. Over the past 5 years, the Rule of Law Collaborative here at the University of South Carolina has been working directly in Ukraine with Ukrainian judges, Supreme Court justices, professors at leading law schools, and prosecutors and defense attorneys to develop a certificate program, the first of its kind in the world, in partnership with a Ukrainian university called Yaroslav Mudryi. And together with the faculty from Yaroslav Mudryi, each of the last 3 years, we've trained over 30 judges, as I said, Supreme Court justices, prosecutors, and defense attorneys in complex concepts of the rule of law. So this is, at the core, not only important to Ukraine, but here on our campus at the University of South Carolina, I think this invasion is a real signal to the inefficacy of the international law framework, and specifically of the United Nations. The Chapter 7 provisions, which are intended to protect states against aggressive war and attacks like the one we've seen, can only be decided by the Security Council of the United Nations, 5 of whom are permanent members. All 5 of those permanent members have the right to veto any action by the Security Council. Those members are the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia. What that means is that the United Nations does not have the power to actually take action against a Russian attack on Ukraine because Russia itself holds a veto right in the Security Council to block any action by the Security Council. I think several things are at stake here. First and foremost, the ability to develop democratic states in the periphery of the Russian space. and to have those democracies feel safe and able to evolve. They won't always be pro-American democracies. The point of a democracy is the public get to elect who they want to run the country. But to have a democracy elected through a free and fair process and able to move forward without foreign intervention is really important. And this is a direct and existential threat to that type of democracy.